So great to see you, and it truly is a wonderful opportunity to have this chance to talk with you in person. I want to start with what must have been one of the darkest and most difficult times while you were Prime Minister, the terrorist attack on 2 mosques in Christchurch. Out of that, of course, you managed to create a historic ban on assault weapons, and when you went back to that community, you made a call asking for a very unique stakeholder coalition called the Christchurch Call. Explain what that was, what particular aspect of those terrorist attacks led you to ask governments, tech companies, civil society to come together to address violent and extremist content online.
You're right, it was and remains, one of New Zealand's darkest days. And many things that I take away from my time in leadership that I know will linger with me, the sorrow from that event is one of them. But I think this pays tribute really to the nature of New Zealanders. When something happens to us, we have a sense of duty and responsibility to try and prevent that thing from happening, not just again, but to anyone else. So for those of you who may not be familiar with what happened in New Zealand on the 15th of March in 2019, a gunman who was actually from Australia decided New Zealand represented a place that was multicultural and diverse and inclusive, and particularly for its Muslim community. And as an extreme white supremacist, he decided he wanted to disrupt that. He came to New Zealand in 2017 with the explicit intent of carrying out an attack. He, on that day, opened fire, as you say, on 2 mosques, specifically targeted Friday prayers, and specifically targeted mosques that he believed would have the highest attendance. Now, alongside this atrocious act, because his intent was to cause some kind of warfare in the aftermath and to gain infamy, he also live streamed it for 17 minutes on Facebook before it was removed. So alongside this horrific event, I remember in the aftermath, journalists asking us the question, what are you going to do about the fact that one of the weapons this terrorist used was social media? And for a brief moment in time, we saw that we actually had some power as New Zealanders. There was an expectation that social media addressed the issue, and we thought we have an opportunity here to either just address the thing that happened to us, to have them come here, no doubt give an apology, or to actually raise the bar of expectation and say, we want more than that. We want systemic change. So over the course of 2 months, we drafted something called the Christchurch Call to Action. And it sought to bring together all those who have a stake in ensuring that the online environment is free of violent extremism and terrorism. Government, tech companies, civil society. We now have 120 organisations who are signatories and members of this movement. It has been going for 5 years. And in the time since the Christchurch attack, we have not had an attack similar to what we experienced, and I put that down to the work that we have been doing. But does radicalisation and violent extremism still exist online? Yes. And so the Christchurch Call still exists as well. And we continue to work hard on the new threats and ongoing threats, including the evolving tech landscape, the impact of information integrity, on radicalisation, youth radicalisation, every area we feel we have a part to play in trying to prevent this from happening again.
It's such an important initiative. And you have already accomplished a lot. More than 50 governments, the tech companies are cooperating. How do you assess the threat of generative AI going forward on information integrity and democracy?
Do you know what I would say? And of course, whenever we talk about emerging technology, new technology, social media platforms, I'm always quick to point out that some of what we see emerge, I don't think we can look to them and say, the source of the problem. social media, perhaps I've likened it before to alcohol. It doesn't create your personality. It certainly enhances aspects of it. And we see that now. And so, the issue for me is, yes, we talk now about the importance of putting in place guardrails. My plea for those who work in the tech sector, particularly those who are at the front line of, the new frontiers in which AI are taking us, do not retrofit solutions. From the position in which you sit, anticipate worst case scenario and work backwards from there. Because retrofitting guardrails, as we have tried to do, around everything from live streaming to some of the other implications that have led to terrorism online, is extraordinarily difficult. We want to maintain a free, open, secure internet environment. We want to maintain freedom of speech. Maintaining that and ensuring that we don't see those radical pathways manipulated at the same time is so tough. So for those at the front line, start at worst case scenario, work backwards.
Well, I'm going to work backwards a little bit to the way in which you, as a woman leader, redefine so much of what you could be as a woman in power, and in your case, a young woman in power, and a mother as well. And we know there's so many remaining barriers to women achieving political power, and then the barriers that exist by the expectations that are put on you as a woman in power. For many people, observing you as Prime Minister, said, here is a woman who has stepped into her power as a woman and is changing the nature of power rather than having power change the nature of women. How do you assess that, looking back on the way that you led?
So funny, as you were talking and you said, stepped into your power, I didn't feel so much that I stepped, that I kind of and then fell forward in this kind of ungracious way. I don't know if, I don't expect anyone particularly to follow New Zealand politics in any detailed way.
Well, they
or at all.
No, all the women in the world in particular followed
Bless you, you're most kind. But in 2017, I'll give you this very, very brief précis. In 2017, we were heading into a general election. I'd been in politics for 9 years at this point. I'd just turned 37. I was the deputy leader of my party, not because in New Zealand, the deputy role is the stepping stone for leadership. If anything, when you're a leader, you pick the least threatening person and you make them your deputy, and that was me. And one day, we're 6-7 weeks out from an election, and one day, my boss, the leader of our party, and I both get this horrific poll result. It was, indicative of where we were heading for the election. We got our worst result that we had, I think, since 1922 that day. It was a bad day. It was my birthday as well. And he called me into his office and he said, I don't think I can do it. And I said, no, Andrew, you're going to be fine. We just need the election platform. We need a campaign. We need a clear space for people to see who you are. And he said, no, I think you need to do it. I almost projectile vomited. I did not. I gave a very convincing argument for why he needed to stay in the job, not least who would vote for a party who 7 weeks out for an election just up and changes its leader. I did not think there was a picture of stability. And so we left it at that, and we muddled on for a week. Things did not get better. And then one Tuesday, he came to work, he quit, and then he nominated me. So that was me stepping into power.
But when you did step into power on the very first day, you said something I don't think I've ever heard another leader say. You said you wanted your legacy, I think I'm quoting this right, to be known, to be kind.
Yeah. You're absolutely right.
What world leader steps up and says, this is going to be my legacy, I'm going to be kind?
Well, from the... I hold this to be true actually for the vast majority of politicians I've ever worked with, regardless of their political persuasion. The vast majority are there because they think they can do good. Now, we have debatable views on what good is. And I hold this is not a view on everyone, but the majority that I've ever worked with. And so when I became leader of the opposition, by virtue of being in opposition, it's an inherently negative place to be. So from day one, I said, we are going to be relentlessly positive. That is how we are going to campaign. While I'm in charge, we will play, this is a very New Zealand statement, we will play it's gendered as well, it's a sports analogy. We will play the ball, not the man. It's relevant to rugby. And it just meant we're not going to attack the person. We're going to debate the issue. And then on my first day in office as Prime Minister, the day I was sworn in, I said I wanted us to be known for kindness. Now, I had to maintain those other values in order for people to believe that to be true. And did everyone around me stick with that? No, not always. But here was the benefit of being a reluctant leader of sorts, was that I had no change or no time or no inclination to change who I was. And so that meant I was able to be a human first and a leader second, and I stuck with that all the way through. And what a blessing that was for me. Now,
and by the way, a blessing for, in particular, women leaders everywhere, whether they're leading a country or a company, because what you were, you proved you could be compassionate, empathetic, strong, decisive, courageous, bold, all in the same leader.
but you're really interesting. You used the word proved there, and I want to just draw that out for a minute. I did feel like I had to prove myself because this notion of kindness was so often coupled with weakness. And I remember when, ever I faced something in office, the first issue that we actually first major issue we had to tackle, we had several, but one was a major biosecurity incursion. Now, when you get a new disease amongst your national herd, in most countries, maybe you'd shrug that off, but when you've got more cows than people, that is a very big deal. And so everyone was like, first major test. And we decided we would eradicate. We've done that successfully to date. Then we had March 15, major test, everyone said. And then after that, I felt like with Whakaare, White Island, the volcanic eruption that we had, and then with the pandemic, every single time, I felt like I needed to prove myself again. And to be honest, it was only when I left that I thought, I'm done with proof points. Actually, it's enough.
And of course, it seems unfair to almost skip to the end, but because of time, we always do in these short times together, Jacinda, but you did decide to leave on your own terms and on your own time, and there was criticism, and I'm just wondering now, when you look back on that, are any regrets or second thoughts or anything that you would have done differently about that or any of your time as a leader?
I think every single day a moment will pop into my head where I'll think or revisit a decision that I made every single day. And that's probably a consequence of who I am. I've been very open about the fact that my whole life I have suffered from imposter syndrome. And I talk openly about that because I think actually we always frame this confidence gap as being, a character trait that means that we're less well equipped to lead. It took me a long time to actually see that my imposter syndrome was a strength, because ultimately it meant that I was willing to bring in the best experts possible. I wanted to hear the advice of others. I wanted to be well-read and well-versed on an issue. So I always approached it with humility, but then because I swatted and understood an issue, I was then at the point I had to make a decision, I was decisive. And so over time, I started to see these things that previously may have been framed as weaknesses as actually strengths, things that helped me to be a better leader. And so now when I reflect back on those things, of course there are things that I think I would have done differently, but I also want to give myself the good grace to know that at the time, I always just did my best. And what more can we ask for?
You can tell how much your leadership meant to so many other people. And I wondered if you, during this time when you really did face such a multitude of crises, did you see yourself as a role model? Did you think about that very often?
No, I think I probably would have been a bit overwhelmed by that. Most days were, you were just in the crisis of the moment. And I'm very aware that we've spent a bit of time talking about some particularly difficult times in New Zealand's history. It's a beautiful and safe place to visit. Lovely. Please. So no, I didn't particularly. But in the aftermath, it has occurred to me, and just as you were reading out the description as I came onto the stage, how blessed was I to live in a country where I never grew up, and this is real, I never grew up believing my gender would stop me being able to be in a position of power. How great is that?
How great is that?
But I didn't think my gender would stop me, but I thought my personality would. I was a crier, I was a hugger, I was very sensitive. Things affect me deeply. And I thought that is not a set of traits you want to take into the blood sport of politics. And so now one of my reflections upon exit is, those traits that I've valued and that I value as a person, that I value teaching to my child. I still just have...
Wait, is this an announcement?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. This is not Skoll World breaking news. We teach our kids kindness. We teach our kids curiosity. We teach them generosity. And at some point, we stop expecting that of our leaders. And so now that I'm no longer in the position that I was, I want to ensure that we don't just have, children who look and think, my gender doesn't matter. I want them to also think, my sensitivity doesn't matter. My heart doesn't matter. In fact, these are traits that will make me a good leader. That's what I hope.
Yeah. Ooh. I think the fact that you brought all that into leadership is the reason that people are asking, will you leave the political arena for good, or can we expect that you might be drugged back in by...
Are you looking for a second kind of announcement? No. I mean, in New Zealand, we have a culture of if you leave, particularly if you choose to leave, it's a little bit curious to go back.
Sure.
No, I have left politics.
Well,
but
that's not good news for any of us, I have to say.
I still want to be useful, though.
Well, when you did leave, resigning on your own terms in your own time, you said to everyone who was listening, you can be your own kind of leader. So this is a room full of leaders, all of us still looking for the best ways to lead for results and positive change. What advice do you give?
Oof. I mean, I don't really feel like this is a room of people I should preach to. You're all doing amazing things. So maybe a couple of messages for you, maybe. The first is, from the day that I took office, I started thinking about the day that I would leave office, not in a longing way, but in a succession planning way, because I think the moment we personalize the work that we do to ourselves, that's actually hard on you as well. And so thinking about what's next will also be critical to giving yourself permission to go when the time is right. And do give yourself permission. And the last thing would be, I'm an optimist. And I noticed this phrase, particularly in the world at the moment, this optimism bias. And do you ever find that when someone says that, they mean it in a particularly derogatory way? It's like rose-tinted glasses, you're not seeing the world as it is, you're not pragmatic. So I've been thinking about that, and I think my reframe of optimism bias is expectation bias. Do not lose your sense of expectation, your expectation that political leaders do better, your expectation that people keep showing up, your expectation that you can create change if you organize and collaborate and work together. The moment we lose our sense of expectation, that is when hope dies. Do not lose your expectations. They're so important.
And may I say on behalf of the Skoll community and the world, thank you for exceeding, meeting, and leading forward for all expectations of a leader. So thank Dame Jacinda. You're welcome.